The diversity in the character relationships has always been one of my favorite things about the Harry Potter series. Harry in particular has a multitude of interesting dynamics with so many different characters, each one bringing its own touch to the story to keep things rich and fresh. But my number one among these relationships would actually have to be one of the more understated ones, a bond shared between two people isolated from the world around them who find it excruciatingly difficult to move on from the sadness of the past. Harry and Lupin's link is one of the most poetic and soulful elements of the story to me, and I think that a lot of that has to do with both Lupin's general energy and empathy and the fact that he came into Harry's life at the perfect time to act as the exact sort of support that was needed. As a teacher, as a connection to what was lost, and as a resultant source of emotional help. The dynamic I'm describing here is without doubt the strongest and most prominent in Prisoner of Azkaban, but in the books after it, it still remains an underlying and subtle element to their interactions that is acknowledged even if it isn't dwelt upon nearly as much. However, after Azkaban, the films basically forget about this bond, reintroducing Lupin in what seems like an afterthought compared to Sirius in Order of the Phoenix, and primarily using him to spout exposition and take up space for the remainder of his role in the films. And I always found that to be quite a shame, because while I think it's clear that Harry does end up being closer with Sirius when all is said and done, his relationship with Lupin is much stronger than what was portrayed and just as beautiful. So the point here is that I will be mostly referring to the characteristics of their connection as is portrayed in the books and the Prisoner of Azkaban film, perhaps leaning more on the film for how it enhances the conversations it adapts through a melancholic and contemplative tone, a focus on scenic and gorgeous visuals to accentuate these words and give them even more weight, and a great approach when it comes to the acting. And the musical score is of course a star of the show as well. For these reasons, their talks in Quran's adaptation are one of my highlights of the series, and as a result, I'll be referring to that film a lot to supplement my points. As I discussed in my long-form critical review on the movies, Prisoner of Azkaban is fixated in large part on the idea of struggling with the passage of time when we may not feel ready to go with it. And the reason that Harry is able to continue moving forward in the end is due in large part to how Lupin clears his head and lets him find some inner peace with the loss of his parents through helping him get to know them indirectly. Prior to this, Harry had only ever heard of his parents as legends, had only seen them in the Mirror of Erised without being able to talk to them, and had only heard of what they were like from people like Hagrid or Dumbledore, who did help in some ways, but never really gave Harry a clear picture of who they genuinely were as people. And during a year in which he was apparently being pursued by a mass murderer and constantly harassed by dementors who forced him to relive the most harrowing parts of his parents' lives, he was utterly lost and in need of something to latch onto to give him a sense of place. Yet, through his talks with Lupin, Harry is able to understand who his parents were, which helps him put to rest some of his uncertainties and hesitations, and allows him to feel a sense of identity and comfort through establishing a proper bond with them. Having been close friends with Lily and James, Lupin is the first instance of a connection to them through someone who had known them intimately, and that eases Harry's mind an immense amount in his most difficult year at Hogwarts up until that point. This also counteracted the horrifying occasions where he had to hear his mother's screams and helped him to accept and move past the bad times to take solace in the joy, even if he may not have experienced it himself and had to feel it vicariously. And in a film-exclusive edition that I absolutely adore, in the midst of learning the Patronus charm, Harry explains to Lupin that his happiest memory likely isn't actually a real memory at all, but instead something he's able to formulate using what he now knows about his parents, to imagine and take peace in the joyful life they could have had.
They were talking to me. Just talking. That's the memory I chose. I don't even know if it's real, but it's the best I have.
And in my opinion, he wouldn't have been able to conjure up this memory with confidence without Lupin. I don't think he would have felt as if he knew Lily and James well enough, and I don't think that he would have been able to think of them in pure happiness without simultaneously feeling sorrow and pain. But those times are gone. Through this, he is finally able to say, "My parents are Lily and James Potter. I know who they were, and I'm proud to be their son." And for these reasons, it's impossible to overstate how much Lupin does for Harry. He's just a beautiful soul, naturally compassionate and understanding of Harry's situation, and unlike the latter's other relationships throughout the series apart from Luna, he can also relate to Harry's isolation. As a werewolf who has been cast out and exiled throughout his life, Lupin can connect closely to the way that others tend to avoid, mock, and fear Harry for his title of the boy who lived. Along with the cruelly persistent hands of time, Prisoner of Azkaban deals heavily with loneliness, and there are no better characters to convey this than these two. As a bridge to the past and a friend to confide in, Lupin centered Harry, and he's the reason that he's able to stay grounded in Prisoner of Azkaban while being confronted by such foreign and scary things. However, I don't actually think that this is a one-way street, and I really believe that Harry helped Lupin a significant amount as well. Regardless of how the story goes out of its way to express how shabbily he dresses, Lupin is extremely well put together otherwise. Calm and composed, kind, intelligent, and insightful, and generally a very respectable and admirable human being to contrast the way he repels others when they come to learn about the truth of his condition. As such, he works as an ideal mentor for a forlorn adolescent like Harry, suffering from the wounds of his reputation, situation, and deceased family. But what isn't dwelt upon directly all that much that's easy to forget sometimes is that Lupin himself lost so much in the same ordeal. He experienced the loss of two of his best friends, one of whom he considered to be a brother. And during Prisoner of Azkaban, he was also under the impression that another friend in Peter Pettigrew had been killed as well, and that all of them had been betrayed by his other best friend, Sirius Black, who had apparently been swayed by Voldemort. All of that seems like far too much for one person to handle, and so even though 13 years have passed, Harry is not the only one hurting here. Sometimes time isn't enough to heal all wounds, and we need that extra stimulus to help us along the way. And I think that Harry ends up being that for his teacher. Although Lupin speaks with his characteristic gentle warmth and maintains control in day-to-day situations, when reflecting on the past, David Thewlis expertly captures a lingering pain in Lupin's voice, so subtle that you can easily miss it if you don't pay attention. Once in a while, you can hear tiny cracks and hints of forced resignation, as if it takes a great deal of energy to maintain himself. At times, he just seems to be exhausted for reasons aside from the toll of his curse, and that makes so much sense given what he's been through.
Your mother was there for me at a time when no one else was. Not only was she a singularly gifted witch, she was also an uncommonly kind woman. She had a way of seeing the beauty in others, even and perhaps most especially when that person could not see it in themselves.
He's had to learn to accept the horrors of the world around him and the misfortune and loss of his past, and he's mostly been able to come to peace with things. But only mostly. No one like this can ever be 100% okay 100% of the time, and I've always felt that reflecting on the beautiful time spent with Lily and James, soothing Harry's pain and helping him, and being a mentor and friend to someone who not only didn't shun him, but had experienced a lot of the things he had and very much cared for him, while he isn't cured of his issues by any means, I think that this saves him in a way throughout Prisoner of Azkaban and helps him move on from his grief. I think he's very grateful to Harry, and through their lessons and talks, I think he's able to find peace with the lingering things that may have left scars. It's a give-and-take sort of relationship, and one of the most heartfelt and powerful aspects of the story for me. A profoundly honest display of moving on from tragedy and loss for both of these characters. Not forgetting your grief and agony, but being able to comfortably remember the good times and find repose in them without having to always feel those pangs of festering pain. And from there, everything gets a little bit easier, and the world seems to hold just a bit more hope than it did before. Many thanks for watching.
You're more like them than you know, Harry. In time, you'll come to see just how much.